Chapter 30. The king's skirmish line, consisting of light infantry accompanied by archers, advanced on Morgoth's left flank in a probing movement, retreating hastily when a battalion of heavy infantry formed up and moved forward to meet them. The lightly armed skirmishers scampered back to the safety of their own lines, ahead of the slow-treading Wargals. Then, as a company of heavy cavalry trotted forward toward the Wargal battalion's left flank, the Wargals reformed their column of fours marching order into a slower-moving defensive square and withdrew to their own lines. As in most battles, the first moves were inconclusive, and for the next few hours that remained the pattern of the battle. Small forces would probe the other side's defenses. Larger forces would offer to counter, and the first attack would melt away. Harold, Fergus, and Tyler sat on their horses beside the king, on a small knoll in the center of the royal army. Battlemaster David was with a small group of knights making one of the many forays toward the Wargal army.
"All this toing and froing is getting me down," Harold said sourly.
The king smiled at him. He had one of the most important attributes of a good commander, almost unlimited patience.
"Morgoth is waiting," he said simply. "Waiting for Horth's army to show itself in our rear. Then he'll attack, have no doubt." "Let's just get on with it ourselves," growled Fergus.
But Duncan shook his head, pointing to the ground immediately in front of Morgoth's position.
"The land there is soft and boggy," he said.
"It would reduce the effectiveness of our best weapon, our cavalry. We'll wait until Morgoth comes to us. Then we can fight him on ground that's more to our liking." There was an urgent clatter of hoofs from the rear, and the royal party turned to watch a courier spurring his horse up the last slope of the knoll where they waited. He hauled on the reins, looking around until he saw the king's blond head, then dug in his spurs again, eventually bringing his horse to a sliding stop beside them. His green surcoat, light mail armor, and thin-bladed sword showed him to be a scout.
"Your Majesty," he said breathlessly, "a report from Sir Vincent."
Vincent was the leader of the Messenger Corps, a group of soldiers who acted as the king's eyes and ears during a battle, carrying reports and orders to all parts of the battlefield. Duncan indicated that the man should go ahead and give his message. The rider swallowed several times and looked anxiously at the king and his three barons. All at once, Harold knew this was not going to be good news.
"Sir,"
the scout said hesitantly,
"Sir Vincent respects, sir, and there appear to be Scandians behind us."
There was a startled exclamation from several of the junior officers surrounding the command group. Fergus swung on them, his brows drawn together in a frown.
"Be quiet,"
he stormed, and in an instant the noise dropped away. The aides looked shamefaced at their lack of discipline.
"Exactly where are these Scandians, and how many are there?"
Duncan asked the scout calmly. His unruffled manner seemed to communicate itself to the messenger. This time he answered with a lot more confidence.
"The first group is visible on the low ridge to the northwest, Your Majesty. As yet we can only see 100 or so. Sir Vincent suggests that the best position for you to view the situation would be from the small hill to our left rear."
The king nodded and turned to one of the younger officers. "Ranald, perhaps you might ride to advise Sir David of this new development. Tell him we are shifting the command post to the hill Sir Vincent suggested."
"Yes, my lord,"
replied the young knight. He wheeled his horse and set off at a gallop. The king then turned to his companions. "Gentlemen, let's see about these Scandians, shall we?" Shading his eyes, Baron Harold peered at the small group of men on the hill behind them. Even at this distance, it was possible to make out the horned helmets and the huge circular shields that the sea riders carried. A small group had even advanced down the near side of the hill, and they were easier to make out. Just as obvious was their choice of the typical Scandian arrowhead formation as they advanced. He estimated that several hundred of the enemy were now in sight, with who knew how many more hidden on the other side of the hills. He felt a great weight of sadness upon his shoulders. The fact that the Scandians were there meant only one thing. Halt had failed. And knowing Halt as he did, he knew that it probably meant that the grizzled ranger had died in the attempt. He knew Halt would never have surrendered, not when the need to stop the Scandians breaking through to the army's rear was so vital. Duncan voiced the thoughts of all of them. "The Scandians, all right." He glanced around the hilltop.
We're going to have to fight a defensive battle, my lords, he continued. I suggest we begin to pull our men into a circle around this hill. It's as good a spot as any to begin fighting on both sides. They all knew it was only a matter of time now before Morgoth advanced, to crush them between the two jaws of the trap he had set. "Rider coming!" called one of the aides, pointing. They all turned to face the way he indicated. From a copse of trees to the right-hand end of the ridge, a lone rider burst into sight. Several of the Scandians gave chase, hurling spears and clubs after him, but he was stretched low over the horse's neck, his grey-green cloak streaming behind him in the wind, and he soon outdistanced the pursuit. "That's Gillen," Baron Erold muttered, recognizing the bay horse he rode. He looked in vain for a second rider behind Gillen, hoping against hope that Halt might have somehow survived. But it was not to be. The Baron's shoulders sagged a little as he recalled the force that had marched off so boldly into the thorn-tree forest. Of all those men, it seemed that only Gillen had survived. Gillen had hit the flatland now and was still riding full pelt. He saw the royal standards flying on the knoll and swerved Blaze toward them. In a few minutes he drew rein beside them, covered in dust, one sleeve of his tunic ripped, and a rough blood-stained bandage around his head. "Sir," he said breathlessly, forgetting the niceties of addressing royalty, "Holt says you can—" He got no further as at least 4 people interrupted him. Baron Fergus's voice, however, was the loudest. "Holt? He's alive?" Gillen grinned in reply. "Oh, yes, sir, alive and kicking." "But the Scandians," King Duncan began, indicating the lines of men on the far ridge. Gillen's grin widened even further. "Beaten, sir. We caught them totally by surprise and cut them to pieces. Those men there are our archers, wearing helmets and shields taken from the enemy. It was Holt's idea." "To what purpose?" Erold asked crisply, and Gillen turned to face him with an apologetic nod of his head to the king. "To deceive Morgoth, my lord," he replied. "He's expecting to see Scandians attack you from the rear, and now he will. That's why they even made a pretense of trying to stop me just now. Our own cavalry is just beyond that brow of the ridge. Holt proposes that we should advance with the archers, forcing you to turn and face the rear. Then, with any luck, as Morgoth attacks with his Woggles, both the archers and your main army should open a path through the center, allowing the hidden cavalry to come through and hit Morgoth when he's in the open." "By God, that's a great idea," said Duncan enthusiastically. "Odds are we'll stir up so much dust and confusion that he won't see Holt's cavalry until he's right on top of him." "Then, my lord, we can deploy the heavy cavalry from either wing and hit the Woggles in the flanks." The new speaker was Sir David. He had arrived unnoticed as Gillen was explaining Halt's plan. King Duncan hesitated for a second or two, tugging at his short beard. Then he nodded decisively. "We'll do it," he said. "Gentlemen, you'd better get to your commands straight away. Fergus, Erold, take a section of the heavy cavalry, each to the left and right wings, and stand ready. Tyler, command your infantry in the center. We'll have them shout and cry and beat their swords on their shields as those Scandians approach. We'll make it sound like a battle as well as look like one. Have them ready to split to the sides at 3 horn blasts." "3 horn blasts, aye, my lord," said Tyler. He dug his spurs into his battle horse's side and galloped away to take command of the infantry. Duncan looked to his remaining commanders. "Get to it, my lords. We don't have much time." From behind, one of the aides called out, "Sir, the Scandians are moving downhill." A second or so later another man echoed the cry, "And the Woggles are beginning to move forward." Duncan smiled grimly at his commanders. "I think it's time we gave Morgoth a little surprise," he said.